Victor Langford had built his entire life on a simple belief: every problem had a solution, especially if you had enough money, intelligence, and unwavering discipline. It was this belief that had transformed him from a scholarship student with worn-out shoes into the CEO of a global corporation. His name a familiar sight in financial magazines and airport lounges across the world. Control was his native language. Precision was his comfort zone. And results were the ultimate proof of his worth. And yet, as he stood in the silent, cavernous hallway of his mansion at 2 o'clock in the morning, Victor faced a problem that refused to obey any of his rules. His daughter was crying. The sound came softly through the half-closed door at the end of the corridor, a fragile, broken sound that felt utterly alien in a house built on strength and silence. Victor stopped walking. His phone buzzed in his hand, a sharp vibration reminding him of a morning briefing in Zurich. But for the first time in recent memory, he didn't answer it. He just listened. "I don't have a real family," Lily whispered through her tears. "Daddy's never here." Victor felt the words strike him somewhere beneath his ribs, a blow deeper and sharper than any boardroom failure had ever been. He stood frozen, his perfectly tailored suit suddenly feeling like heavy, restrictive armor he couldn't take off. 8 years old. That was how old Lily was now, too young to articulate her grief properly, yet old enough to feel the crushing weight of absence. Too young to understand the complexities of corporate responsibility, yet old enough to notice when bedtime stories were replaced by voice messages sent from a distant time zone. Victor turned away quietly, as if the silence itself could undo what he had just heard. Lily Langford lived in a mansion most people only ever saw in movies. The ceilings were impossibly high, the floors were polished to a mirror shine, and the walls were decorated with art that Victor had purchased because experts assured him it was valuable. Her bedroom alone was larger than the entire apartment Victor grew up in, and yet it felt profoundly empty. Nannies rotated through Lily's life like temporary, high-end furniture kind, but completely interchangeable. Tutors filled her afternoons with language lessons and math drills, praising her intelligence before leaving promptly before dinner. Even meals were scheduled events, served by staff who spoke in hushed tones and carefully avoided eye contact. Her father loved her, that much was true. But love, Lily had slowly learned, didn't always mean presence. Victor left before sunrise and returned long after she was asleep. And on the rare occasions he was home, he was distracted, tethered to calls, reviewing reports, or firing off emails. Lily had learned to recognize the distant look in his eyes that meant not now, so she stopped asking him to play. She stopped asking him to stay. She started talking to her stuffed rabbit instead. Victor noticed the change in small, inconvenient ways. Lily no longer ran to greet him with a hug when he came home. Her drawings became quieter, less color, more empty white space. Teachers reported that she was polite, obedient, and withdrawn. That word withdrawn bothered him. So did the guilt that crept in during those rare moments he could uncontrol late at night on a long flight, when sleep refused to come and his defenses were down. Victor told himself he was doing all of this for Lily, providing the best schools, the safest environment, the brightest possible future. But children don't live in the future. They live in the now. And Lily's now was desperately lonely. Victor Langford did not sit with emotions. He analyzed them. After hearing Lily cry that night, he spent hours in his study, staring at spreadsheets without seeing a single number. His mind, trained for pattern recognition, searched for variables, for solutions. What had changed? What crucial element was missing? The answer came slowly, reluctantly, fighting against his every instinct. Lily didn't need more things. She needed a father. Or, at the very least, someone who could be the father Victor couldn't seem to be. The realization felt like failure, and Victor Langford hated failure more than anything. But if this was a problem, then it could be solved. By morning, a plan had begun to form in his mind. A perfect, logical plan. Children needed stability. They needed structure. They needed role models. Lily had lost her mother 3 years ago, a loss Victor had buried under an avalanche of work because grief felt unmanageable. Since then, Lily had been drifting, untethered. She needed a consistent male presence in her life. Someone strong, reliable, accomplished, someone successful. Victor's mind went where it always did, to his resources. If Lily needed a father figure, Victor would procure the best one available. He would not leave something this important to chance or messy emotion. He would curate it just like everything else in his life, but there would be one crucial difference this time. He would let Lily choose. The thought felt generous, even progressive. Giving her agency would empower her. It would make her feel heard. And because Victor would control the options, the final outcome would still be acceptable 3 candidates. Carefully selected, wealthy, respected, men who understood the languages of responsibility and power. Men who could open doors for Lily that Victor, with his demanding schedule, couldn't always attend to. Victor convinced himself it was a compassionate act. He convinced himself it was a gesture of love. Lily sat across from him at the breakfast table later that week, stirring her cereal slowly, her spoon clinking against the bowl. Victor watched her for a moment from behind the financial section of the newspaper. "Lily," he said, lowering the paper, "can I ask you something?" She nodded without looking up. "Would you like another dad?" The words sounded awkward and foreign even to him. "Someone who could spend more time with you. Help us be a family again." Her spoon stopped moving. She thought carefully before answering. She had learned that words mattered around adults. "Would you still be my dad?" she asked, her voice small. Victor felt something twist inside his chest. "Always," she nodded. "Okay." No excitement. No fear, just a quiet, resigned acceptance. Victor took it as enthusiastic agreement. Within days, his assistant was making discreet calls, background checks were run, schedules were aligned. Everything was handled with the utmost secrecy. Victor Langford did not allow his personal matters to become public conversation. The event itself would be simple, a casual meeting at the estate. Lily would interact with the candidates naturally. Victor would observe. Psychology consultants were on standby, just in case. It was a choice, guided but free. 3 candidates. 1 decision. Victor believed, he truly believed, that this would heal the fracture forming inside his home. That structure would replace sorrow, that logic would override longing. What Victor didn't understand, not yet, was that children don't choose what looks good on paper. They choose what feels safe. And safety, unlike money, cannot be bought or brokered. As Victor stood alone in his office that night, the city lights glowing like a galaxy behind him, he felt something unfamiliar press against his absolute certainty. It felt like doubt. But he ignored it. Because Victor Langford had never been wrong before. And he had no idea that the very plan he believed would fix everything was about to unravel his entire definition of success. The Langford estate had never looked more alive and never felt more artificial. From early morning, staff moved through the mansion with quiet urgency, adjusting floral arrangements, polishing already spotless surfaces, and aligning furniture as if preparing for an international summit. Security checked every entrance twice. Catering trays were arranged with military precision. Assistants whispered into headsets, confirming arrival times. This wasn't a family gathering, it was an operation. Victor Langford stood near the tall windows of the main sitting room, hands clasped behind his back, watching the preparations with the same detached focus he brought to shareholder meetings. Everything was under control, every variable accounted for. This mattered. Lily sat on a velvet sofa nearby, her small feet not quite touching the floor. She wore a pale blue dress chosen by her nanny that morning, soft, elegant, and slightly uncomfortable. In her lap rested her stuffed rabbit, its ear frayed from years of quiet companionship. She watched the adults move around her, feeling like a guest in her own home. "Remember," Victor said gently, crouching down to her level, "there's no pressure. Just talk, be yourself." Lily nodded. She didn't ask why everyone was acting so strange. She had learned that asking questions often slowed things down, and people didn't like that. The first candidate arrived exactly on time. A sleek silver sports car rolled through the gates, its engine purring softly as it stopped near the entrance. A well-dressed man stepped out, sunglasses in hand, confidence radiating from his posture. Richard Halle. Victor straightened, recognition flashing across his face. Richard was everything the world admired: wealthy, charismatic, successful, a man who knew how to navigate power. Richard entered the room with an easy smile. "Victor," he said warmly. "It's been too long." Victor shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for coming." Richard turned his attention to Lily, kneeling slightly and opening a small velvet box. Inside, a diamond bracelet caught the light, glittering like something out of a fairy tale. "For you," Richard said. "A young lady should always know her worth." Lily blinked. "It's very pretty," she said politely, because that was what she had been taught to say. The bracelet was placed gently on her wrist. It felt heavy, cold. Richard spoke enthusiastically about private schools, horseback riding lessons, summer trips to Europe. He spoke as if mapping out an investment portfolio, his words polished and impressive. Victor watched closely, nodding at all the right moments. Lily listened and felt nothing. She smiled when expected. She answered questions softly, but her eyes wandered to the window, to the floor, to the rabbit in her lap. When Richard laughed, she flinched slightly, unsure if she was supposed to laugh too. When he finally stood, Victor thanked him sincerely. Impressive, Victor thought. But Lily just felt smaller than before. The sound of distant blades cutting the air announced the second arrival. A helicopter descended onto the estate's private landing pad, drawing the attention of every staff member. Lily stood instinctively, watching through the glass as the machine touched down. Dr. Anthony Pierce emerged moments later, composed and confident, his expression calm in a way that suggested he was used to pressure. A renowned surgeon, respected, admired. He greeted Victor with professional warmth before turning to Lily. "I hear you're very smart," he said, handing her a sleek tablet. "This has educational programs, drawing apps, anything you like?" Lily accepted it carefully. "Thank you." Anthony spoke about discipline, balance, and excellence. About opportunities and structure. He praised Lily's posture. Asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. "I like to draw," she said quietly. "That's wonderful," he replied. "Creativity is important," he smiled, but his eyes were already drifting toward Victor, as if seeking approval. Victor felt reassured. Anthony was composed, accomplished, a man who could guide Lily into a successful future. Lily nodded when spoken to, but her fingers tightened around the stuffed rabbit. She felt like she was being interviewed. As the afternoon wore on, Victor reviewed Lily's reactions the way he would quarterly performance metrics: polite, calm, no resistance, no enthusiasm. But surely enthusiasm would come later. Children didn't always know what was best for them. Society would approve of either man. Victor told himself that was what mattered, yet something unsettled him. Between conversations, Lily's gaze kept drifting, not toward the candidates, but toward the doors, toward the empty spaces between moments, toward something she couldn't name. Victor noticed. "What are you looking for?" he asked her quietly. She hesitated. "Nothing." But children often say nothing when they mean something important. The sitting room fell into an awkward pause after the second candidate departed. Assistants whispered. Staff cleared glasses. Victor checked his watch. That should have been it. 3 candidates he had planned, but 2 had already been enough to see the pattern. Still, his mind returned to something Lily had said earlier that week. "He helped me when I fell." Victor hadn't been there. Someone else had. The thought made him uncomfortable. And then, against every instinct that had guided his success, Victor made a decision that wasn't on any schedule. "Hold the next arrival," he told his assistant. She blinked. "Sir?" "I'm adding someone." An hour later, a modest car pulled up to the estate gates. No spectacle, no announcement. Daniel Reyes stepped out slowly, adjusting the collar of his worn jacket. His hands bore the marks of labor scratches, calluses, evidence of a life far removed from glass offices and catered events. The guards escorted him in, their expressions polite but confused. Daniel's heart pounded as he entered the mansion. Everything felt too big, too clean, too quiet. He had almost turned back twice on the drive over. Then he saw Lily, her face lit up in a way it hadn't all day. "Mr. Daniel?" she said, standing quickly. The room froze. Victor turned sharply. Daniel knelt instinctively, smiling gently. "Hey, Lily," she held up her wrist. "Look, they gave me this." He studied the bracelet. "It's shiny," he said honestly. "Does it make you happy?" Lily thought for a moment. "I don't know," she said. Victor felt something shift, something he couldn't quantify or control. Daniel hadn't brought a gift. He hadn't prepared a speech. He stood there awkwardly, unsure why he'd been invited at all. But Lily had stopped looking at the doors. She was looking at him. Victor watched his daughter laugh softly at something Daniel whispered, and for the first time that day, he couldn't tell whether his plan was succeeding or quietly falling apart. And as Daniel Reyes stood in the heart of a world he didn't belong to, one truth became impossible to ignore. Money had brought everyone else into the room, but presence had changed it. And the real choice hadn't even begun yet. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for the next chapter. Daniel Reyes had learned to measure his life in small victories: a clean hallway before the morning bell, a packed lunch that didn't fall apart by noon, a tired smile from his daughter at the end of a long day. These were the things that mattered, because in Daniel's world, there wasn't much room for anything else. By day, Daniel was a school janitor. He arrived before sunrise, when the hallways were still quiet and smelled faintly of disinfectant. He mopped floors, emptied trash, fixed loose chair legs, and wiped away the fingerprints of hundreds of children rushing through their lives. Most people barely noticed him. He didn't mind. By night, he worked warehouse shifts lifting boxes, scanning inventory, moving until his muscles burned and his eyelids felt heavy. He drank cheap coffee and counted hours. Every shift meant groceries, rent, school supplies. Every shift meant Sophia. Sophia Reyes was 10 years old and far more understanding than any child should have to be. She did her homework quietly at the kitchen table while Daniel cooked simple meals. She never complained when he missed school events. She never asked why things were harder for them than for others. Daniel tried to give her what he could: honesty, warmth, and consistency. He couldn't give her money, so he gave her time. On the morning Lily Langford fell, Daniel was restocking paper towels near the elementary wing. He heard the cry before he saw her, a sharp, frightened sound that cut through the noise of passing students. Lily sat on the floor near the lockers, tears streaking her cheeks, blood seeping through the knee of her pristine uniform. Other children stared, unsure what to do. Daniel dropped his card immediately. "It's okay," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "I've got you." Lily looked up at him, fear clouding her eyes. She didn't recognize his face, only his voice steady, calm, unhurried. He cleaned the scrape carefully, talking the whole time. Not about pain or danger, but about how brave she was. About how scrapes looked worse than they felt. About how crying didn't mean weakness. When she trembled, he stayed. When the nurse was busy, he stayed. When Lily's tears slowed to sniffles, he stayed. "You're safe," he told her. "I won't go anywhere until you're okay," and he didn't. To Daniel, it was nothing special. To Lily, it was everything. That afternoon, Daniel signed out from his shift and headed toward the exit, thinking about the grocery list in his pocket and whether Sophia needed more pencils. He didn't notice the man standing near the school steps until the secretary called his name. "Daniel," she said, waving him over. "One of the parents would like to speak with you." Daniel frowned, his stomach tightening. Parents usually only spoke to him when something was wrong. He stepped outside and saw Victor Langford. Daniel didn't know his name, then only that the man's presence felt heavy. Tailored coat, perfect posture. A phone that looked more expensive than Daniel's monthly rent. "Yes, sir," Daniel said cautiously. Victor studied him. Not unkindly, but thoroughly. "My daughter mentioned you," Victor said. "She said you helped her today." Daniel nodded. "She fell. Just a scrape." "You stayed with her," Victor said, not a question. Daniel shrugged slightly. "She was scared." Victor was silent for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "Would you be willing to come by my home this afternoon?" Daniel blinked. I don't understand." "It would mean a lot to Lily," Victor replied. "Just a visit." Daniel hesitated. He thought of Sophia waiting in the library, finishing her homework. He thought of the extra shift he'd planned to pick up. But he also thought of Lily's shaking hands, of the way she'd looked at him when he promised not to leave. "If it's for your daughter," Daniel said slowly. "Okay." The Langford estate gates were taller than anything Daniel had ever seen. He almost turned the car around. Everything about the place screamed that he didn't belong: its size, its silence, its perfection. His jacket felt too thin, his shoes too worn, his hands too rough. Daniel sat in the car for a full minute, breathing. This is just a visit, he reminded himself. For a kid. Security waved him through. When he stepped inside, the marble floors reflected his nervous posture back at him. Voices echoed softly. People in neat clothes glanced at him, curious and confused. Then Lily appeared. Her face transformed. "Mr. Daniel!" she exclaimed, running toward him without hesitation. Daniel knelt, instinctively opening his arms. She hugged him tightly. Victor watched from across the room. The contrast struck him like a physical blow. This man, this janitor, hadn't brought a gift, hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't impressed anyone in the room. And yet Lily looked happier than she had all day. Daniel smiled gently. "How's the knee?" She lifted her leg proudly. "It's better." "I told Daddy you stayed." Victor felt his chest tighten. Daniel stood slowly, suddenly aware of where he was. "I can go if—" "No," Lily said quickly, grabbing his hand. "Please stay." The word please carried more weight than Victor expected. Daniel didn't know what he was doing there. He didn't know why Victor Langford was watching him so carefully. He didn't know why the room felt tense. He only knew how to be himself, so he listened when Lily spoke. He laughed quietly when she told him about her drawings. He didn't interrupt. Didn't rush, didn't check the time. Victor noticed everything. The way Lily leaned closer to Daniel, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her voice grew stronger. This wasn't a performance. This was connection. Victor Langford, who had built empires by reading people, realized something unsettling. He had misjudged the most important metric of all. Daniel Reyes didn't look like success. But to his daughter, he felt like safety. And as Victor watched Lily smile with a fullness he hadn't seen in years, one undeniable truth settled in his mind. The most valuable thing Daniel brought into the room wasn't money, status, or influence. It was presence. And Victor could no longer pretend that presence didn't matter. Not when his daughter's happiness was standing right in front of him. The room had never felt so quiet. Victor Langford stood at the center of the sitting room, hands clasped behind his back, a posture he reserved for delivering decisive verdicts in boardrooms across the world. Around him sat the men he had carefully selected, wealthy, accomplished, impressive by every conventional measure. Assistants lingered near the edges, pretending not to listen. Staff paused mid-step, sensing that something irreversible was about to happen. Lily stood beside Victor, her small fingers wrapped tightly around her stuffed rabbit. The room felt too large for her, too heavy with expectation. Every adult in it believed this moment belonged to logic, to preparation, to a calculated outcome. But Lily felt something else entirely. Victor cleared his throat. "Lily," he said, keeping his voice calm and measured, "you've met everyone. Now it's your decision. You can choose who you want as your new dad." The words landed softly, and then echoed. For a moment, no one moved. Richard Halle straightened his jacket, confident in the quiet assurance of a man used to winning. Dr. Anthony Pierce folded his hands neatly, his expression composed. Both men wore polite smiles, the kind shaped by years of success and public approval. Daniel Reyes stood slightly apart. He didn't belong in this formation. His hands were clasped nervously in front of him, his shoulders tense. He kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting someone to tell him there had been a mistake. Lily took a small step forward. Victor watched her closely, his mind already racing ahead. He told himself that she was simply nervous, that children needed time to gather courage. He reminded himself that he had done everything right, structured the environment, chosen excellent options, given her agency. This would work. Lily looked first at Richard. She noticed the expensive watch on his wrist, the polished shoes, the easy smile. He met her gaze confidently, nodding slightly, as if encouraging her toward a correct answer. She felt nothing. She turned to Dr. Pierce. He smiled kindly, his posture perfect, his expression warm in the way professionals practiced. The tablet he had given her sat untouched on a nearby table. She felt distant. Then Lily looked at Daniel. He wasn't smiling, he looked worried. And somehow that made her feel safe. Lily tightened her grip on the rabbit and walked forward. She walked past the rich men, past the gifts, past the expectations. She stopped directly in front of Daniel Reyes. "I choose him," the words were soft, but they hit the room like thunder. Gasps echoed from the corners. Someone whispered. Someone else inhaled sharply. Richard's confident smile faltered. Dr. Pierce stiffened, confusion flashing across his face. Victor felt the world tilt. "Lily," he said quickly, stepping forward. "Sweetheart." She turned to him, her eyes steady despite the tremor in her voice. "He listens," she said. "He helps people." "And he stays." The room froze. Daniel's heart dropped into his stomach. Lily, I didn't—" He looked helplessly toward Victor. "Sir, this isn't—" Victor raised a hand without realizing it, silencing him. He was staring at his daughter. Not the quiet, withdrawn child he had worried over, but a young girl standing firmly in her truth. "Lily," Victor said slowly, "this is a very big decision." She nodded. "I know. You barely know him. I know how he makes me feel." Victor had no response prepared for that. Richard stood abruptly. "Victor, surely this is emotional confusion," he said carefully. "Children don't always understand what's best for them." Victor didn't answer. Dr. Pierce cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should revisit this after some time." Still, Victor remained silent. Because Lily had stepped closer to Daniel, not away from him. Because Daniel, embarrassed, uncertain, out of place, had instinctively placed himself slightly in front of her, as if shielding her from judgment. Victor noticed. That gesture was uncalculated, unpolished, real. Daniel's mind raced. He thought of Sophia, of rent, of his second job, of how impossible this was. "I can't be what you want me to be," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "I don't have money. I don't have status." Lily looked up at him. "I don't need that." Victor closed his eyes briefly. He had spent his life equating provision with love. He had measured worth in numbers, futures, achievements. And here stood his daughter, dismantling everything with one simple choice. "Daddy," Lily said, her voice soft now, "you said I could choose." Victor opened his eyes. He saw fear there, but not confusion. He saw certainty. And love. A kind of love that didn't negotiate or perform. It simply was. Victor exhaled slowly. The room waited for his verdict. He thought of late nights, of missed moments, of the sound of Lily crying behind a closed door, of how Daniel had stayed when Lily fell. Victor turned to the men he had invited. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "This meeting is over." Shock rippled through the room. Richard's jaw tightened. Dr. Pierce nodded stiffly. As staff began to move again, Victor knelt in front of Lily. "If we do this," he said carefully, "it won't be easy." Lily nodded. "Easy isn't important," Victor swallowed. For the first time in years, his daughter had taught him something. He stood and faced Daniel. "You didn't ask for this?" Victor said. Daniel shook his head. "No, sir, but you showed up." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't need to. Victor extended his hand not as a CEO, not as a man in control, but as a father who had just realized he didn't have all the answers. Daniel hesitated, then shook it. The decision was made. And as the doors closed behind the men money could buy, Victor Langford understood something that would change him forever. Power could command rooms. Wealth could shape futures. But love could rewrite them. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next video. The decision made headlines before it made sense. CEO's judgment questioned after unconventional family choice, one article read. Another used the word eccentric. Some used reckless. Victor Langford's board of directors called emergency meetings. Investors asked careful questions wrapped in polite concern. Friends who once admired his decisiveness now spoke in lowered voices. Victor listened, and then he went home. Because inside the walls of the Langford estate, something had shifted so completely that the outside world felt distant, almost irrelevant. The mansion was no longer silent. Lily laughed again. It wasn't loud at first. Just small burst-soft giggles during dinner, quiet amusement while drawing at the kitchen table. Sounds that had been absent for so long that Victor noticed them like music returning after a long pause. Daniel Reyes showed up every day, not because he was expected to, but because he said he would. He arrived after long shifts, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion, his hands still marked by work. He never complained. He never announced his sacrifices. He simply stepped into the rhythm of Lily's life as if he had always been there. Homework became a shared effort at the dining table. Daniel didn't always know the answers, but he sat beside Lily anyway, reading instructions carefully, encouraging her when she grew frustrated. "It's okay not to get it right away," he told her. "Trying matters." Those words stayed with her. Dinner changed too. Gone were the catered meals arranged perfectly on silver trays. Daniel cooked simple food: rice, vegetables, warm soup. Meals were imperfect and sometimes overcooked, but they were eaten together. Daniel asked Lily about her day. He listened. Victor sat at the table and watched. He had never realized how much he'd missed. At first, Victor told himself he was observing, studying the dynamic, measuring impact, but it didn't take long to see what numbers never could. Lily leaned into Daniel when she spoke. She waited for his reactions. She smiled more easily around him. She spoke louder, more confidently. She felt anchored. Daniel never tried to replace Victor. He never overstepped. Instead, he filled the spaces Victor hadn't known were empty. And that made Victor uncomfortable, because it meant acknowledging that love wasn't something you provided through resources. It was something you practiced. The board meeting was tense. "This could affect the company's image," one director said carefully. Victor sat back in his chair, hands folded, listening. He noticed how little the words stirred him now. "My daughter is thriving," he said calmly. "That's my priority." A pause followed. Victor Langford had never said anything like that before. At home, Lily's transformation continued. She slept better. She drew brighter pictures. She talked about school with enthusiasm. She spoke about Sophia, Daniel's daughter, with curiosity and kindness, asking questions about her life. Daniel made sure Sophia felt included too. He spoke of her with pride, sharing stories that made Lily laugh. Victor noticed something else. Daniel treated Lily as a child, not a project. When she made mistakes, he didn't correct her immediately. He let her think. Let her feel. Let her grow. Victor watched these moments from a distance, something heavy settling in his chest. Regret? One evening, Victor arrived home earlier than usual. The mansion smelled faintly of cooking. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. He paused in the doorway. Daniel stood at the stove, stirring a pot, while Lily sat at the counter, legs swinging as she talked animatedly about a school project. Daniel nodded, responding thoughtfully, fully present. Victor realized something startling. They hadn't noticed him yet. He had walked into a moment that existed without him. And instead of feeling replaced, Victor felt relieved. Because Lily wasn't waiting anymore. She was living. Later that night, Victor found Lily curled up in bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm. He sat on the edge of the mattress. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes," a simple answer. He hesitated. "Do you still need me?" She turned toward him, surprised. "Of course, Daddy," Victor swallowed. "I don't feel lonely anymore," Lily said softly. The words were gentle, but they broke something open inside him. Victor closed his eyes. He understood then, not with logic, but with clarity, that everything he had built for Lily had been missing the one thing she needed most. Not protection. Not opportunity, presence, and Daniel had given it freely. Victor stepped into the kitchen later, finding Daniel washing dishes. "Thank you," Victor said quietly. Daniel glanced at him. "For what?" "For being here," Daniel nodded. "She deserves it." Victor realized then that Daniel wasn't competing with him. He was supporting Lily, supporting family. Victor Langford, who had conquered markets and negotiated empires, stood humbled by a man who had simply shown up every day. Money could open doors. Power could command respect. But love was learned. And for the first time in his life, Victor was ready to learn. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more. The first thing to change was Victor Langford's calendar. Not in a big dramatic way, but with small, deliberate adjustments that would have once felt impossible. Meetings started ending earlier. Flights were rescheduled. Dinners were blocked off like immovable appointments. For the first time in decades, Victor chose home over urgency. At first, it felt all wrong, like ignoring a fire alarm that only he could hear. His phone buzzed insistently during meals. Emails piled up in his inbox. His assistant's voice held a note of surprise whenever he declined a late-night call, but Victor stayed. He sat at the dinner table instead of hiding behind a screen. He learned to listen instead of just directing. He watched Lily eat and laugh and talk with a newfound confidence that still caught him off guard. The mansion changed right along with him. Rooms that had once echoed with emptiness now carried the sound of voices. The kitchen, once sterile and unused, became the true heart of the house. The grand dining table bore the marks of daily life-scattered crumbs, open notebooks, and Lily's half-finished drawings. The Langford estate slowly stopped feeling like a monument to wealth. It was finally becoming a home. Daniel Reyes never asked for anything. Not for money, not for recognition, not for a single word of reassurance. He just showed up, quietly and consistently, with no expectations. He adjusted his work schedule wherever he could, trading shifts when necessary, arriving at the mansion tired but always present. He learned Lily's routines, her moods. He memorized the way she frowned when she was concentrating, the way she bit her lip when she was nervous. He learned when he needed to speak, and more importantly, when he just needed to sit beside her in comfortable silence. Victor noticed something else, too. Daniel never tried to be impressive. He didn't posture or lecture or perform, he just cared. Soon, Sofia Reyes became part of the rhythm as well. She started coming over after school, shy at first, unsure how to exist in a place so grand and different from her own home. But Lily welcomed her without a moment's hesitation, eager to share her markers, her stories, and her space. Victor would often watch the two girls studying together at the kitchen table, their heads bent close, whispering and laughing. He learned that Sofia's favorite subject was science and made a point to ask her about it. He even attended a school event for her one afternoon and realized, sitting there on a hard folding chair, how long it had been since he'd applauded simply because a child on stage looked proud. These moments weren't efficient. They weren't productive in any business sense. But they were everything. One evening, Victor stood in the doorway of the living room, watching Daniel help Lily with one of her drawings. Daniel didn't correct her lines or tell her how it should look. He just asked questions. "What do you want it to be?" he asked gently. Lily beamed at him. "Happy," she said. In that instant, a warmth settled deep in Victor's chest. For years, he had taught Lily how to succeed. Daniel was teaching her how to feel safe. And Victor was finally beginning to understand the profound difference between the two. The outside world, of course, didn't stop questioning. There were articles in business magazines, endless speculation, and hushed murmurs in the boardroom. People just couldn't understand why a man who had everything would change so much for something so intangible. Victor eventually stopped trying to explain it to them, because explanations were for people who believed that value only existed on a balance sheet. He knew better now. One night, long after the house had gone quiet, Victor found Daniel sitting on the back patio, just looking up at the open sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Victor asked quietly. This complicated arrangement?" Daniel thought for a moment before answering. "No," he said simply. "Kids need people who show up. Everything else just figures itself out." Victor nodded, a wave of understanding washing over him. He had built his entire life on the exact opposite assumption, and it had nearly cost him his daughter. The years passed gently after that. Lily grew taller, her laughter grew louder. Her drawings, full of color and life, filled the walls of the house. She learned to speak with confidence, to ask questions without fear, and to trust the people around her. When people asked about her family, she answered easily. When they asked about that day, the day of the choice, she would smile. "That was when my life really began," she said once, older now and thoughtful. "That was when I learned what truly mattered." She hadn't chosen wealth, she had chosen love. She had chosen safety, she had chosen sincerity. Victor watched her become her true self, and in doing so, he became someone new too. A man who left work early, a man who showed up to school events. A man who finally understood that success wasn't measured by growth charts or stock prices, but by whether the people you loved felt alone. Daniel never took credit for any of it. He never needed to, because the truth was simple. The richest families aren't built with money. They're built with hearts that show up. And that was the only kind of wealth Victor Langford would ever chase again. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more.